Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this cloud decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And we are quite firmly at a point now where I can see the road to things getting better. And I'm not going to lie, it's happened way quicker than I thought it would. Now, in earlier videos I've obviously been talking about reform's momentum and how some areas of the new elite have started seeing the writing on the wall, especially with this clip from the newsagents, when talking about Nigel Farage winning Newcomer Politician of the Year with the Spectator Awards.
And up he walks on the stage and he said, well, thank you, it's lovely to be the newcomer. I'm just telling you that at the next election there will be hundreds of newcomers and they will be reform newcomers and we will be forming the next government. And he sat down and the room went utterly silent.
Yep, because the newsagents are at least smart enough to realise that, yes, that is Farage saying, the writing's on the wall, your time is coming up, you're not going to be happy about it. But Politics Joe decided to go ahead and make this point, frankly, an awful lot more bluntly. Just yesterday, or 2 days ago, because I'm recording this in advance, the channel decided to put out this little podcast with Ava Santina and Ed Campbell, titled Nigel Farage will be the UK's next Prime Minister. They're not even saying probably, they are saying it with definitive terms, which I guess is partially clickbait, obviously. But we are effectively seeing almost a fall of Rome moment with the new elites, the mainstream media. Politics Joe isn't mainstream, but it's certainly adjacent, and they certainly rely on the mainstream ecosystem to survive, and they're effectively looking into the abyss, and this is an 18-minute struggle session about that, and yes, we are going through it.
Reform are really ramping up support, and I do think that we are sleepwalking into a reform government, and I'm really concerned that a number of Labour MPs aren't quite grasping that they are going to be their next competition.
I think it's much more likely that they are just trying to, meet that bridge when it comes to it, you know. I think what's much more likely is that because you're not, part of the Labour Party clique, I guess you could call it, you probably don't get a good insider as to how the Labour Party actually feel, because from leaks that we do get, they're pretty terrified.
So there was this clip of Harriet Harman over the weekend. She was on Trevor Phillips on Sky News, and we'll play it for you now.
How worried should the party be about the threat, or the challenge, I should say, from Farage?
Well, I think people should be very concerned about reform because they're not just a threat to individual parties, but I actually think they're a threat to democracy because they are offering easy answers to real problems, which are not a solution and will just increase people's distrust and disillusionment.
Yeah, again, this is a Labour Party member, a staffer. I don't think she's an MP anymore. No, because she's in the House of Lords now, effectively saying, oh, well, you see, Reform are going to make all the mistakes Labour are making right now. You have to have wool pulled firmly over your eyes to really believe this, but frankly, I don't think she does really believe it. Anyway, let's head back over to what Politics Joe have to say about this.
Okay, so there she is discussing reform and how they're a threat to democracy. Now, I'm really worried about this for a number of reasons, but mostly because we are always an election cycle behind the US.
Well, thank you for that hard-hitting analysis of a common meme that everyone says, but I'm kind of afraid to say it's not quite true. For a start, the Reform Party, they're not taking over the Tories, which is what happened over in America with Trump. Secondly, they had Biden for 4 years, and I guess you can say, oh, well, you see, bringing Labour in is the equivalent of the Biden being brought in. But that's kind of ignoring the whole fact that the Tories been in 14 years before that. When, Obama was in, you had a 4-year term with Trump. You didn't have 4 years of a hard-right Tory government, did you? In fact, you saw the biggest increase in immigration ever, while there was a pandemic, by the way. I think this is what I don't like about Politics Joe the most. Because it's things like this when I say they rely on the mainstream ecosystem to survive. All they're really there for is to repackage that for millennials and zoomers. That's all Politics Joe are for. They could not come up with an original idea if they tried. This isn't original analysis. This is just parroting what the mainstream say, even if it's wrong.
So I'm concerned about this because we are always one election cycle behind the US. Now, if you look at what happened the last 2 elections, now I'm going to speak in broad strokes. If you look at what happened with Biden and Trump, Biden won, and you can make quite a strong argument that that was simply a protest vote. People did not want Trump to win.
I mean, there were a lot of reasons that Biden won, some I don't particularly want to get into on YouTube for obvious reasons. But either way, Trump conceded, so we have to act like it was legitimate. And yes, Biden is, by popular vote, the most popular president to ever have been voted in. And again, there are a number of reasons for that. A lot of the arguments for why it was the case is that COVID was going on at the time, so people really didn't have an awful lot else to do other than vote. A lot of people were doing it by mail-in, which obviously Democrats tend to do more anyway. As Ava says, some people might have been doing it to protest or just for a change away from Trump for whatever reason they wanted that. It's a lot more complicated, but as she said, she's going in broad strokes, but I don't really know what this has to do with the issue at hand. Aside from maybe she's trying to say, oh, well, you see, Labour got in this year because it was a protest vote against the Tories, which for an awful lot of people, yes, it was.
What happened in our election just gone? Labour won because they didn't want the Tories to win.
Yeah, so this analysis is, oh, I've got a conclusion, I will work backwards from there. Bad stuff. Right, come on. Tell me why you're afraid of Farage, why you're worried.
Broad strokes I'm speaking in. Now you look at the American election that just passed in November, and Trump wins on this sort of populist ticket. The Republicans are like the sexy anti-vote.
Yes, I will go along with this. They are the countercultural vote because, yes, your side has been winning for years, even if Tories have been in charge. This is the massive issue that the right has at the moment in Britain. Effectively, you have to tell people that they've been gaslighted for 20 years, that the Tories have been right-wing, when they've been anything but right-wing. Hence, the right-wing are all moving to reform, because they can trust that they will try and be right-wing.
Right? They are the sort of people you want to put on your social media because it's controversial, particularly young men.
Not just that, but it's also just fun. It's not fun being a young man and basically having all of the feminists, all of the leftists effectively say you're a bad person because of the way you were born. Nobody finds that fun. TikTok over the election was just full of people doing the Trump dance to the YMCA, like at frat parties and house parties over in America and things like that, and it looked fun. It looked like the type of thing you'd enjoy being at and people you would be with. But people like on Politics Joe and Ava Santina, they're all just boring people that like to be really safe edgy. And we seem to be coming to the end of the safe edgy period of our culture, which I'm very happy with. Because Hassan Piker is the biggest safe edgy person you could imagine, and as soon as he falls, it's gonna be the best day on the internet ever.
Who are really, I guess, enfranchised by people like Elon Musk, who are kind of in the hemisphere with Joe Rogan and that sort of ilk.
Yeah, once again, people who are successful, people who are fun, people who are entertaining. You know, and at the same time, people who are, I'd say, remarkably professional. You know, Joe Rogan, as an MMA commentator, very professional at what he does, knows what he's talking about, very friendly and polite with people. Elon Musk, largely the same, aside from obviously when he's on Twitter, but that's what Twitter's for, I guess. And yeah, that stuff is really appealing to young men. Of course it is. They want to be successful. They want to aspire. They want to know how to be a man in the world. And the left really doesn't have an answer for how to be that. The best they could do was have a senile Biden in charge, and he really wasn't aspiring.
We are moving into that sort of election with reform. And the more that you have Labour MPs or former Labour grandees like Harriet Harman describing them as anti-democratic, the sexier and more appealing they become.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, that is basically true. But young men especially are so disenfranchised that even when I was turning 18, there were many people my age just saying they're not going to bother voting. They don't really see the point in it. And you got to bear in mind that this was not too long after, you know, when I was 18, it was 2014. It wasn't too long after the Tory coalition with the Lib Dems got in, and obviously all the young people were promised, oh, unis are going to be free because the Lib Dems are in, and then they ended up going to like $9,000, which, to be fair, they've stayed at for some years. And because we were all idiot teenagers, we didn't understand economics or the wider concept of student loans, a lot of people saw that as basically being left behind. And so with that, they get disenfranchised, and now we're all coming to our 30s and we end up like the Nick from the Social Contract, where we just see all our money going to things that we would never want our money to go to, and we have no choice in it. And basically the party, Reform, saying that they are going to change that, is the one that is probably going to win with the under 30s vote. Yes.
So what is surprising there, that like Labour Party grandee is anti-reform? I don't think Reform can actually do very much with that.
What the hell are you talking about, Ed? What do you mean? do you mean Reform can't change their mind? Yeah, they know.
What I think it did speak to was actually maybe like a potential failing of Reform potentially is... So at the moment...
Politics, Joe, and I mean this sincerely, you need to get a new editor. I've had to cut out Ava Vantina thinking that she's going to sneeze and then saying, oh, we'll go again. And now you've got Ed Campbell just losing in his words. This is very, very annoying to react to, let alone watch. Get to your point, and please edit out this crap. This is why I don't stream often, because this is what I'm like between these takes, and barely anyone wants to hear that. Like, please just, can you cut it so that we only get to the points? Or at least get better at thinking on the fly if you're going to do it this way. I've had to train myself for streams in that way too.
There isn't a clear idea of how Reform would do in government. There's almost like a last... What there is potential for is Reform to be the last roll of the dice in like liberal democracy.
What, by them having... They want proportional representation voting in their contract, and they want to turn the House of Lords into an elected chamber. That last roll of the dice for liberal democracy. What, make it more like the other liberal democracies? These are things I don't want, by the way, just to be clear. These are my least favourite Reform policies, but as I say, they want 90% of the other stuff I want, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to take the bad with the good. But yes, we don't know what Reform would be like in government, but we do know what the Tories and Labour would be like. And yes, I think we would prefer to roll the dice, because how can you do worse than a 3? People don't think they're going to roll snake eyes with Reform.
Like in worst case scenario, like I don't think this is terribly likely. There's not an anti-democratic bent within Reform. I would say they're part of like a strong right, like a radical right rather than like far right. I think that's how I'd classify.
Well, if you actually bothered to do your research here, Ed, you'd know that they don't have an anti-democratic streak, and they are pushing for more democracy, let's say, than Labour and Tories, which again, I'm not necessarily a fan of, but that is what Reform policy is. But it is quite funny how you now have to take them seriously, and so dismissing them as far-right clearly isn't working anymore, but you still need a word that makes them sound bad, so they're calling them radical right. Oh, it's so funny. This is why I'm so white-pilled about stuff like this. They've realised that the narrative just isn't working anymore. It's been shaky for quite a few years, but now Labour are in charge, which was part of the reason of 0 seats, by the way. There was some logic to this, but clearly Labour are in charge. Things have not got better. In fact, in an awful lot of ways, they've got worse, and they're struggling to actually defend them, despite the fact that the mainstream ecosystem is supposed to be pro-Labour. But because Politics Joe is just on the outside, they know they need to be pro-Labour, but they don't really know how to do it and be honest at the same time.
If a Reform government is voted in, and they are unable the same way, I think they'd have the exact same pressures as Starmer is currently facing, in that fix the country. And once they don't do that, there would actually maybe be room for an even further right, anti-democratic movement to gain support.
Absolutely amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Amazing how in this democracy, people that you vote in can't actually do anything to try and fix the country, mainly because Tony Blair and then David Cameron started pushing an awful lot of power away from Parliament to all the quangos, as Liz Truss constantly goes on about. Which is really ironic, because all of the people on the right who effectively want to get rid of the civil service are in theory much more democratic than literally every Labour MP and every Labour supporter who, very much sticks with the manifestos, because they have no plan to actually put power back into Parliament, which is where our democracy effectively lies, in the House of Commons. And so anyone willing to try and push in that direction is actually more pro-democracy than anyone else. I am basically unironically saying that Dominic Cummings is probably the biggest Democrat in the country, because he realises that people you vote in to the government, or the MPs voted in with the party that then makes a government, are supposed to be the people actually making these decisions, and they can't make them at the moment. And this is the problem, because their analysis is only surface level. They kind of know that MPs and the government doesn't really have power, but they can't explain why, because it will mean listening to Dominic Cummings for an hour and they think he's evil, so they won't do that.
If reform gain support in like a making light and sowing distrust in institutions, they are breeding a beast, an even further right beast potentially.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? Farage has been the boogeyman of these people for literally decades at this point. You know, it's years for Politics Joe because they're all young. And now it's got to a point where they're kind of saying, you know what? Best case scenario is probably Farage if we're going to go right wing. Effectively, they're kind of juggling having to face the fact that they've been afraid of Farage for years, and now it turns out he's probably going to be the next prime minister, at least in these people, or at least there's certainly a risk of it. So they're having to contend with that, while having to realise for years they've called him basically the most evil right-winger, far-right Hitler on the planet, or in Britain anyway. And now they effectively have to accept, you know what, now that he's been normalised, he's actually not that bad, but my God, if he gets in and fails, we're only going to go further right. And I think the most interesting thing is that there's no introspection here. There's no critical thinking of their own positions and things that they wanted, because if they really did face up to that, they would realise that the country we live in is actually a result of what they want, because their ideals versus reality end up with the mess that we are in now, and they can't accept that, because they have to carry on thinking that we've had years of austerity, the Tories ruined everything, oh, Labour will come in and fix everything, oh, Labour come in and can't do anything because, oh, wouldn't you know it, Parliament doesn't have power. I guess we should have let Dominic Cummings do what he wanted to do then. But no, instead they have to pretend that there is absolutely nothing that can be done at this point to stop a far-right party coming in, unless Reform can actually do something to battle the civil service. But they're never going to say that directly, because if they say that directly, they start having to blame Labour for an awful lot of things, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I get that. But then you could make that argument about Labour at the moment, because Keir Starmer has been in government now for a few months.
Yeah.
And the most recent speech we heard from him was that it's actually very difficult to do anything because civil servants won't let you push any legislation through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I have said before, I reckon that's going to be a massive help to the Green Party, because people are getting fed up with this uni party not wanting to touch the civil service. That's really what this is coming down to. Because as much as it sounds like a cop-out of, oh, this is why we're failing, it's because of the civil servants, it's actually true. So it's one of those things that needs to be absolutely top to bottom, completely root and branch cut from the civil service. All the uselessness, all the awful incentives, all the decision-making powers need to be put back into Parliament, but nobody's willing to do that, apart from, of course, Dominic Cummings. So, as I keep saying, my best-case scenario, like my ideal world, my utopia, is Reform get in and they bring Dominic Cummings in to effectively be head of the Ministry for Efficiency and effectively do everything he wanted to do when he was under Boris Johnson. That would be the ideal. But my God, you say that to these people and they'll shy away from it. It's like, no, I feel safer with Labour, though. And so in that case, they are for the country getting even worse.
That's almost similar to what the Conservatives were saying.
Yeah.
That's straight out of the Dominic Cummings playbook.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like he was right. I love how they call it a playbook, and they haven't realised that Dominic Cummings has been saying exactly the same things and said that Labour have run into exactly the same problems as the Tories because they don't have any actual decision-making power. Anything that gets done under this Labour government is effectively because the civil service is letting them do it. That's effectively what it comes down to here.
But that is sowing distrust in institutions.
Yeah, but you've got to understand that the permanent civil service is actually quite a recent phenomenon. All these quangos that were made in the last 30 years, like, these aren't like... I don't know why they're acting like Conservatives now, where there's this instinctual trust of these institutions. Like, these institutions, you know, they're younger than most people in the country. These aren't the type of Conservative institutions like, you know, Wimbledon that's been about since the 1800s, the FA, Oxford University that's been around since like the 13th century. This is not the type of conservative institutional base that we're talking about. We are talking about effectively post-revolutionary institutions that, yes, we want to counter-revolution against.
In the same way, I totally understand what you mean about when they get in, they will have their feet held to the fire. And they can't just say things like,
we're going to like liberalise everything.
yes.
Hold on. I'm really confused now. Why are Politics Joe finding the term liberalise everything icky? What? Is this a self-awareness that they realise that they're kind of Fabians, that they're not really liberals? Is that what's happening here? Man, this is way more interesting than I thought it would be. We're looking into the minds of these two people when they don't have a script. And it turns out that they kind of know the basics of all this, but then they just keep letting their mask slip. They go on about wanting liberal democracies and things like that, and then Reform come in and say we want to liberalise everything. All of a sudden, that's bad to the liberals. Again, this goes back to my point that liberalism is just this massive umbrella term that basically means absolutely everything in modern Western democracies. That's basically all it is, all the way from classical liberals to even these types of Fabian fake liberals. It's effectively just a meaningless umbrella term. Liberalism is good or bad, entirely dependent upon the way you say the word liberal. That is effectively what my conclusion is here.
And we're going to, the state's now going to be like the size of a pinhead, and there's going to be no
every
student
school's a
loan.
free school.
Yeah, by the way, unironically, that would be my dream country, yes.
However, that doesn't mean they won't get into government. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to build a rather successful electoral strategy. Because look, a lot of their policies are at odds with each other.
Oh, go on. Show me what research you've done.
I actually think sometimes the kind of further right rhetoric that has been peddled by them is actually not what the party wants to be.
Oh my God, what is it? It's so strange. Reform, as far as I can tell, are one of the most consistent parties on their message I've ever seen. Basically everything I see from them is just a reflection of what is in their contract. Yeah, you got the online right saying, they're backpedaling on immigration, they're backpedaling on Islam, when they never talked about Islam, for God's sake. And then immigration, they've said the same thing all the time. Get it down to net zero, then deport all criminals and illegals. Yeah, according to the online left, that's them actually going further to the right than what they were doing before. This is one of the strangest things ever. Somehow there's this strange variation on horseshoe theory where the right wing have decided that Reform are going too left wing, and then the left wing have decided that actually they're going more right than they were. How has this happened?
When Nigel Farage said something about Muslims a few months ago, and I actually think that was on Trevor Phillips at the time, he's essentially said that they don't. I've got to be very careful with my language here.
Oh, interesting. Why do you need to be careful with your language here? In this country where we supposedly have free speech, do you want to liberalise free speech?
I believe he said something on the lines of they don't assimilate.
Yes, they were going through Henry Jackson Society's statistics, and I can't remember the exact statistics. Something like half of Muslims in the UK think that Hamas didn't commit atrocities, and I think 75% of them are in favour of blasphemy laws against Islam or something like that. Things that very much are not what the general British public believe. And so, yes, they said that there would be obviously huge struggles trying to actually get these types of Muslims to integrate or assimilate, whichever word you prefer. I thought I'd just clarify all this because Politics Joe don't have as good memories as me.
They don't learn the language.
Yeah, that's another issue. There are people that have literally lived in Britain for decades and don't know English. That is obviously a massive issue.
I actually thought that didn't fit what the Reform Party are trying to be.
You don't think the party that wants way less immigration and talks about integration doesn't want to talk about integration? Excuse me?
I think they want to project it without saying it.
Yeah.
Oh, right. You think Reform wants dog whistle. Well, again, it's good the reminder that Trevor Phillips, who Nigel Farage was talking to, was largely agreeing with him that the statistics did show that there was a problem. And again, this is something that is quite out in the open at this point anyway. You don't really have to dog whistle facts from the Henry Jackson Society. Effectively, Ava is trying to say, I thought they were supposed to dog whistle that sort of thing, but no, they don't.
I don't know. I think you can't they can't just dog whistle the whole time. They have to bark. They have to bark sometimes. Otherwise they'll forget.
Have to bark.
They have to bark. and that was a barg.
I do find it remarkably interesting how they are deciding more to focus on the fact that Nigel Farage is talking about this issue. They ignore the fact that it was with Trevor Phillips, who was a Labour MP, politician, who was head of the Proto Equalities and Women's Committee, which I think was called the Race Relations Committee back in the day. And they're also just ignoring the facts that both these people were putting forward, both these politicians were putting forward. No, that's not the issue. Or the issue is that we're now at a point where they're barking rather than dog whistling, and it's like, can we actually look at what they're saying? That's a lot. I find that a lot more interesting than the fact that the Overton window's moving right.
But Braverman barked more than Farage did. No, but she did. But she said actually more like objective, like, you know, quotes, things that you could quote.
Yeah.
That were, you know, within that realm of rhetoric.
Yeah. Suella Braverman, she was saying a load of stuff as Home Secretary, I know. Oh, the rhetoric is terrible. Yeah, I think there's a really big reason as to why Suella Braverman's husband has moved over to Reform. I think it's because she's not that far behind. Again, the rhetoric's absolutely meaningless when you're in power, and when you're in power you don't do anything about it. Again, they don't seem to have any introspection. Why is it that she had all this rhetoric and was doing absolutely nothing about it? Oh, because she couldn't because of the civil service. But no, we have to talk more about, oh, isn't it worrying that the Overton window's moving right? No, not really. It's really overdue.
Farage is sort of like Teflon. He goes near it and he doesn't say it.
Yeah, and look how successful it is. He's now rising up in the polls. Do you understand the problem that your quote-unquote dog whistles are so noticeable by pretty much everyone that, yeah, it's not a surprise that he doesn't need to say the quiet part out loud. Are you seriously surprised by that? It's interesting how they're focusing on that, which was, as they said a few months ago, but they're not talking about the thing he said a few weeks ago in which he said alienating all Muslims is a bad idea. But they literally might not be aware of that because they probably don't watch their alternative media competition like Winston Marshall, but that's where Reform are going mostly these days. Why, you might ask? Well, it's because that's where the young men are, which is who they're trying to advertise to an awful lot these days.
Something that I'm kind of interested in is the phenomenon of Reform support amongst young men.
Yes, Ed, why do you think you're not as good at attracting the young male electorate?
So in the general election, there was basically equal amount of support amongst young men between Reform and the Green Party. And in all the reporting I've seen done about young men supporting Reform, it has largely been young men who have joined Reform.
Yeah, and again, I suppose to give Ava some charity here, that is actually very similar to what happened over in America, yes. Whether we end up getting a similar result, i.e. Reform in charge, that is yet to be seen. I personally don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be more of a Reform Conservative coalition, but the way the polls are now, basically no government can be formed. It's going to be very interesting.
Like, no one would ever suggest that a young Labour member is representative of the wider young people at large, even though that was the party that young people voted for with the largest majority. That's been the case for ages.
Well, yeah, and as I say, I think the reason for that over the past 2 decades has been that the Tories have been in charge, been the party of pensioners, and young people basically feel like, oh, well, anything else has to be better, and then it turns out that's only really the case if you're in the public sector. But as I keep saying, I mention this all the time, there are people I know who have already moved country, people who are thinking of move country, people that want to move country because they feel like staying here is just going to leave them completely stagnant. And the thing is that I'm the type of person who probably would have that mindset if I didn't think things were going to get better in a few years under, say, Reform. I also just have an insane love for this country, every field and hedgerow, as Peter Hitchens says. But the people that run it are temporary, and while they may have caused some permanent problems, after reading George Orwell's England, Your England, effectively it's only going to stay that way should the English actually stay here. And so I'm going to be one of the English who stays here.
But there's been very little. What I think is actually would be more interesting to see is interviewing normal people who aren't involved in politics but are determined to vote. They're like, I'm going to vote for Reform. That would be the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, this is absolutely the area where mainstream politicians and mainstream new elites really need to start getting worried, because bear in mind, over 40% of the people last election didn't vote. That is a lot of disaffected people. That is prime real estate for a brand new party, which Reform is. Hence they're making a name for themselves. Hence they're going up in the polls. Hence in some polls they're beating Labour and in others Conservatives. It's going to be a mad year next year. You will see. And then when we finally get to elections in 2025, 2026, the penny's going to drop for an awful lot of people. There will be mass panic. And the problem is that they have built up too much of a reputation of disappointing people that it's all going to be for naught. Reform are only going to grow. And, as I say, there's every chance that they could be the next government.
If you're vox popping normal people in regional parts of the UK, young people who are all saying, I'm going to vote for reform, that would be illustrative of this phenomenon that people talk about, rather than just interviewing people who are standing to be councillors in local elections.
Yeah, interestingly, I've noticed that Politics Joe haven't really done a vox pop like that in quite a while. We're talking months. I think they covered the farmers' protest, but that's the last time they really did a proper vox pop, which I'm not going to lie, I've missed because I like reacting to them. But it is interesting that they've not done it for a while. And I think part of the reason is because it's basically the footage they get is probably way too pro-reform. And the whole point of Extremist Britain is that you were supposed to effectively laugh at people like that, but because it's got too real, my theory is that they basically don't want to put it up on YouTube because it would encourage too many of their own audience to actually listen to reform, and it could even move them over.
Sure.
Which I've not seen. I completely understand the argument.
I mean, I have seen it. During the election, I did speak to a number of young men who said they were going to vote for reform.
But that wasn't borne out in the numbers.
I see what you, yeah, but they don't vote. Young people don't vote.
Yeah, this is pretty accurate analysis from Ava, I'd say. Certainly from people in my age group and below, there seems to be more of an understanding of why people would vote reform. I mean, an awful lot of my friends are quite left-wing, to be honest. But years ago, if I said I was a Reform member or a UKIP member, you know, there's every chance that they'd have a go at me. These days, they just have a sign of worry on their faces. Oh God, now I know someone who's part of Reform. The movement's growing. And as that goes on, you get more and more people effectively saying, yeah, this Reform lot, I kind of like what they're saying. You know, it's a breath of fresh air after 14 years of Tory nonsense, and then now we've got a few months of Labour nonsense that really doesn't change much. Yeah, Reform really seem to be the ones who get the idea that Britain really does need radicalising change. And these safe, edgy people who go on about Tories being terrible and how there needs to be change, yeah, they're now worried about that and don't want anything to change now that Labour are in. It's funny, that.
That's the one. I think we need to start from that benchmark. You basically got to say it's like we're pretty much on zero on getting like 18 to 24-year-old young men to vote. And if they do, they're at university and they might go to vote for the Green Party or used to vote for the Labour Party, but not so much anymore.
Oh, again, it's things like this that make me think that Politics Joe is largely part of the mainstream ecosystem. They're just an alternative media version of it. Because she sounds almost devastated about the fact Labour aren't doing well, because Labour are firmly the party of the new elite. And the Tories have been trying to get that reputation as well, and they've completely failed because they also want to win elections. And they're also a broad church of fighting factions. Labour does have fighting factions, it's just that they are entirely devolved from the new elite. And Politics Joe here are effectively young journalists who are trying to get into that mainstream, but they're at the alternative edges of it for now, because effectively they're young. They are paid to be young political commentators who give you this safe, edgy vibe of, oh, we're not like that boring BBC News, we're here to be hip and cool for all you young people so you can listen to us. And effectively they'll just give the new elite line over and over, which is what's happening here. It's what's happening with the newsagents. What the newsagents say, what Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell say, what Politics Joe say, it's all largely the same thing. It's just the different audiences. And what they're all saying right now is that they are worried about reform. That is the best early Christmas present I think I could have asked for.
Like
if you can mobilise them to vote, then a legacy party has a problem.
Like if Reform get cool people, that's the problem. Like they're not Richard Tyson cool.
yeah, they're definitely worried. There's so little actual political analysis here, but you know, politics is mostly vibe, so I'm mostly fine with this analysis anyway. But yeah, I am on board with the fact that Richard Tyson isn't cool. I don't really care, and to be honest, when I have seen him in interviews on alternative media, he just seems normal. He might not be cool, but he just seems like a normal guy. I can't remember the podcast I saw, but he talks about football for like 20 minutes a podcast. Like, that is a thing that normal people will like. Because when it comes to other mainstream politicians, no matter how much they like football, they sound like they're lying. Richard Tice is pretty much the opposite. I can believe that he watches football every weekend. And I can believe that he is a genuine fan of Southampton, I think his team is. You know, I think it was David Cameron who said he's a fan of West Ham and nobody believed him. Starmer's a fan of Arsenal. Basically, nobody believes him. My point is that they don't necessarily have to be cool. They just have to be believable and normal, which is where Tice fits in.
Nigel Farage's cool. Richard Tice isn't cool. Lee Anderson's kind of funny, I guess. James Murdoch is hits women, so...
But you know...
You notice he doesn't bring up Rupert Lowe, but Rupert Lowe's definitely straddling the line between normal and cool. And yeah, James McMurdoch, basically, there's a reason that he's out the limelight. He is a amateur politician by every sense of the word. And when it comes to his conviction, he served his time. As far as us in Britain should be concerned now, that's a part of his past that he clearly wants to get past and leave in the past. He's not that person anymore. It's amazing how these left-wing restorative justice types, all of a sudden when it comes to their political enemies, they've had this restorative justice. All of a sudden, apparently, it doesn't apply. Oh, he beats women. Yeah, he did, 12, 13 years ago? Yeah, he's admitted it. It's bad. He spent his time in jail. He's a new man as far as we're concerned. At least that's what the left-wing argument's supposed to be. And yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. The more that comes up, the more I think that the establishment or new elites are overplaying their hand on the subject. So I think that's going to stop being brought up soon.
Listen, it didn't matter. This is the whole thing that I found really puzzling and that I worry about with them. It doesn't matter that he has a spent conviction for kicking his girlfriend. It doesn't matter, because the way that it's moving online at the moment, we are moving back into like the sort of trenches of misogyny. Mm-hmm. We are. It is sexy to hit women again.
That's your take from this? Do you think nobody's defending him kicking the woman? People are saying, well, he's spent his time in jail. It sounds like he deserved it. He's a new man now. The argument with James McMurdoch is that he's gone down the restorative justice route. You know, not that I listen to Andrew Tate, but I've never ever heard him say beat women. It's certainly edgy to be more openly misogynistic than it was 5 years ago. But my God, I remember it being at university and Vine was out at the time, and you had it was like a proto TikTok. You know, you had Dapper Laughs on there making his 7-second videos about effectively how women are sex objects, and that was the joke. Like, this is a bad thing to be. And generally that's how it's coming back as well, but it's funny. Because after decades of third-wave feminism, it is funny. It's funny to openly be like that now. And the point of it being funny is that it is a bad thing to do. You cannot find me anyone that defends beating women. Well, maybe you could, but you wouldn't find it in the places that you're expecting to find them. You wouldn't find it in Reform.
Like, look at what the absolute... I mean, social media, you've got to be careful. It's not indicative of, like, wider public sentiment.
It isn't. But it is absolutely true that people are certainly going to be more open when they're anonymous online. I know this firsthand.
But look at the absolute tomfoolery about that picture of Sydney Sweeney that went viral.
Yeah, I agree. That was stupid. I'm just skipping this bit.
There is a online trend of return to the 50s and like domestic, like the traditional domestic responsibilities for women and stuff like that.
Yeah, from what I can tell, there's a lot of women in that movement too. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous to try and make out that this is a patriarchal movement trying to push women into this box when an awful lot of women, whether it's just for aesthetics or whatever, clearly quite like being in that box. And a big complaint is that it's not even an option to have a house and have a decent life. Both parents, well, both the husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, or same sex, whatever, both have to be working. And that's effectively what this complaint comes down to, which I think is fair.
I just think that we're not ready for it. We're not preparing for it properly. So we heard this morning there was a Labour minister doing the rounds, and he was asked by Nick Ferrari, will you be cancelling the local elections next year? And didn't give a definitive answer. Mm-hmm. Farage just straight on Twitter. Cancelling elections in some areas of the country where reform are gaining momentum is the act of a desperate government. They have the audacity to tell us that a threat to democracy whilst they act like... to call us a threat to democracy whilst they act like a third world dictator.
Yeah, Farage is absolutely phenomenal at playing the politics game. That is absolutely true, no doubt about it. And I made a deeper video about this yesterday, about how the cancelling of elections actually kind of makes sense with what they're doing, but what they're doing to councils is actually the worst problem, in that they are effectively trying to make further Labour fiefdoms, like they've done with Sadiq Khan in London. Yes, you had Boris Johnson before that, but the whole idea was to have it as a Labour stronghold. Lo and behold, it is. Manchester with Andy Burnham, and there's a few other mayors around the country as well, who have effectively come about because of things that the Tories, and I think New Labour did it as well, where they effectively try to change the boundaries of counties to bring in these big metropolitan city mayors and give them more power because they'd likely be taken up by Labour. And they mostly have. But that's far more complicated to explain than just saying Labour are cancelling elections and they're calling us undemocratic. How ridiculous is that? It's great at just getting to the point. And the point I make is just the same as Farage, which is that they're effectively trying to screw about with the system that we have to stay in power. That's all the point is. And it doesn't really matter how much detail you go into. Like, at every level, that is the story you can tell, which is just great.
That is sowing distrust.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the fight that Reform will take to the upcoming election. Labour do not want you to have a voice. They are a dictator. They don't care about you, the common man, and we do.
Now, can you please get into some interesting political analysis and say whether it is accurate or not? Because otherwise, again, it's just going to make people think that it's true. You don't have a counter-argument to it at all. Tell you what, how do you respond to that?
But it comes back again to Labour's terrible communications. Like, why are you not having... I was like, Will Lloyd wrote in the Times today. He was basically saying, like, broadcast media numbers are down so much, and however many people now consume news online. Why is Keir Starmer queuing up to get his arse kicked by Beth Rigby? He was like, he was basically arguing he should do one broadcast interview a year, and spend the rest of his time nailing social media.
Unironically, that would probably be a really bad idea for Labour, because I think that they would be absolutely destroyed on alternative media, much more than they would on the legacy media. It's absolutely true that legacy media is just dying. I mean, part of the reason that GB News is doing much better than Sky News is because they do a lot of original online content now. I've said it before, but effectively it is just Reform Party political broadcasts every now and then, with Matt Goodwin, and even Tom Harwood's been on there, making decent centre-right to right-wing points. And what is the left-wing version of that? They don't... no, they do have that. It's Politics Joe. And this is what happens when they are actually challenged politically. They don't know what to say. All they can really do is parrot what other people have said, which, don't get me wrong, I parrot what other people say quite a bit as well, however, especially with the video I made 2 days ago about Ciri from Witcher 4 in that trailer. I certainly do have my own opinions as well, which I believe is why I've managed, literally from the ground up, to create a channel that has 10,000 subscribers, and it's only growing. Whereas, frankly, Politics Joe, they're actually part of a parent company. I can't remember the name of the parent company, but they're effectively funded by, frankly, billionaires to keep talking like this, but they've managed to hire just parrots. And when the parrots have to actually say something original, they can't do it. They have no analysis for this. All they can say is, oh, yeah, Labour's communications suck. Yeah, great, everyone knows that. Oh, social media is growing. Yeah, people have known that for years too. You don't learn anything from Politics Joe. And the reason you don't learn anything is because Politics Joe isn't there to give you concise original analysis. They are there to just parrot the new elite talking points. They are literally NPCs.
Actually, he should obviously come here. I'm not even just saying that,
I know, but they've got like the do you know who said that the other day? Jonathan Gullis on Sky.
Said what?
He said that the government should be doing interviews on Joe. And obviously,
yeah.
But
it's not just us to be big-headed. They should be engaging with us, with Lad Bible, Novara.
Yes.
If you want, you need to be engaging with good. Do you know?
I mean, they are kind of right. I wouldn't bother with Politics Joe, as I say. Politics Joe have this habit of just parroting mainstream talking points anyway, as do Lad Bible to an extent. Novara Media would probably be the most interesting. They certainly are kind of the left going their own way. They have been lost since it's clear that Corbyn's not getting anywhere, and they have absolutely nobody who can replace him and actually push the socialism that they want. But this is the thing. It's going to be avoided like the plague by Labour, because Labour is full of these incompetent politician NPCs. they won't actually know what to do with some of Bastani's questions, because Bastani has been signalling that he's trying to go right. I think it's all an act, but if he managed to get Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves onto their interviews, I think it would be a bloodbath. I think it would be horrific for them. Because I don't like Novara Media or their politics by any stretch of the imagination, but it is true that they are outsiders. It was a weird time when Jeremy Corbyn was in the Labour Party, and that's when the Labour were trying to go further left. And that was actually pushing the Tories far left, well, not far left necessarily, but to the left as well. Hence the reason everyone's moving to Reform. Even if Reform don't get in, it doesn't really matter. Everyone's already moving right. And I want to support Reform still, even though they're moving right, because I want them even further right. I want to live in basically fineism, which we are very far from. Because, if immigration numbers are skyrocketing, if GDP per capita and other metrics to measure living standards are just completely stagnant, or even going down in some cases, then yeah, I clearly want something that is massively going to throw a spanner in the works of the institutions that are keeping it that way. And Novara Media do want that too. And they are outside the mainstream as much as they end up on BBC quite a bit. They are certainly adjacent to it. They are certainly closer to it than, say, I am, and certainly than, say, Lotus Eaters are. But with how critical they are online of all governments and of Labour at the moment, it's clear that it would be a bloodbath. On Politics, Joe, it would be an easy ride. On Lad Bible, it would be an easy ride. Easier, probably, even, than Sky News. But unfortunately, it's their best chance to basically avoid the alternative media like the plague, because that is actually going to test their mettle. And they don't want to be tested. They just want to up the minimum wage, give unions all the pay rises they are effectively paid to do, and then they don't care about anything else, really. They just want to try and win elections, but I think they've kind of come to the conclusion that that's not going to happen, so they're trying to get as many council mayors as possible instead.
Dylan Page? He's like the newsreader on TikTok. He's like News Daddy. And he's like, he just reads the news. He's like a news influencer, essentially. I don't think he's a trained journalist, but he just like reads out headlines. They should be going on to him.
No, I mean, the overall point I do understand, but I would not go onto a TikToker who all he does is read the news. That is literally an NPC. No. They'd be better off on going on any of the number of podcasts that ex-MPs have gone on to, say, Liz Truss, even possibly the Lotus Eaters, but they're obviously never going to go on that. I don't think you're going to find many mainstream people going on Lotus Eaters these days. But the right-wing podcasters and interviewers, Winston Marshall, that's one that Labour are never going to go on, but you're seeing more and more right-wingers going on it. Steve Baker's been on a few that I can't remember the name of. Reform have been on all of these things as well, and this is why they're getting more popular. And the thing is that the mainstream parties can't really do that while they're still part of it, because they'll have to go against party lines too much, and it's just not going to work. But they don't want to get into that analysis because it's too uncomfortable and basically cedes ground to reform.
They should be doing as much as they can to get to these people.
It should be a journalist that interviews him.
See what I mean? They still have the mainstream mindset. No, it should be someone who's professional. No, people do not like the professionals anymore. They don't trust them anymore. It's Dominic Cummings' whole point of your rural farmer who gets all his information from TikTok and Twitter is way more informed than anyone who non-stop watches Sky News or BBC News. And that's why you have to stop going to the professionals, because they are professional propagandists. They're not professional journalists. They are there to push the narrative forward rather than actually get answers out of anyone. But Politics Joe, they are the type of people who effectively have their career in front of them to get into the mainstream. So obviously Ava's saying they should... obviously Ava is going to say they should be interviewed by professional journalists, because she needs to suck up to the professional journalist class to get a job there. That is just blatant.
It's quite embarrassing at this point. Like if Farage... Farage just has like a meme guy.
It was sort of like during the election when they went straight to the Sun. That was like their first port of call.
For the Sun's
to not even endorse them.
Their panel show.
Yeah.
What the
and it got 2,000 views if that.
And I'm actually not trying to slag off the Sun here, but if you're going to do the Sun, you do the print edition. Why are you putting time and effort into a broadcast bit that they're only doing because News UK have a spare studio because they shut down Talk TV?
I mean, you did just directly slag off the Sun there, but either way, I do get your point. Why are you going to the most unpopular places on the fringes of the alternative media? The Sun's hardly alternative, but trying a panel on the Sun is them trying something new to get into the alternative media on, say, TikTok and YouTube and things like that. And they try and blame an archaic comms department, but the reality is that Labour seem to realise even before, or even after this election, that they are remarkably unpopular. Maybe this is giving them too much credit, but I think they realise if they go to alternative media, it's just going to be a car crash. Because alternative media, you need to be adaptable. You need to be able to face new challenges and, improvise with your answers quite quickly, which Labour and all their NPCs are really bad at doing. Pretty much all of Reform is really good at doing it. Tice is definitely the worst, obviously, but I don't know about James McMurdoch, but the other three are pretty good when it comes to improvising on the spot. It's great.
Yeah.
That's like, why are you going there and not to a digital native first?
And you see, that's what Trump's son got about the landscape in America.
Oh, Barron.
Yeah. He was like, you need to get on the podcasts. Get onto the podcasts.
Where's Starmer's son? Starmer's son should be... you should be saying, you should be on Have a Word, you should be on Angela Rayner. I've been saying this for ages. She should do Saving Grace. Angela Rayner on Saving Grace.
Yeah, she'd be great on there.
Absolutely.
She'd fly.
Nail that.
These are very much podcasts and other areas of the online that I have managed to be unaware of up until now, having a quick look around. Yep, these are effectively channels that have had some mainstream people on. I mean, Politics Joe have had mainstream people on, as have Navarro Media as well. And it's kind of true. Like, you need to go into Normieverse a bit. But yet, Labour just are refusing to do that. What's the reason? My best guess is that they don't want to go there because being normal is going to risk party line too much. I'm going to risk these people effectively not being able to act normal, because acting normal will go against party line in some misstep or something like that. Basically, it's too risky and too much of a minefield that if they're ever pushed on anything that any of these people understand, the winter fuel payments, for instance, they're asked by Normieverse, why are you freezing my grandparents? They're not going to know what to say in Normieverse, because giving your standard answer to media-trained mainstream legacy media, completely different circus to that you see on the podcast. And again, this is what I really appreciate about Reform. They know how to deal with the media, but they also know how to be normal. And you're probably going to have to see more normal people in the next few years coming into politics, because that is where votes are going to come from alternative media. But again, they don't really want to say, oh, Labour are incapable of being normal, though, aren't they? Because frankly, they are Labour activists.
Even when they come out in the morning on a broadcast round and they've got a new policy to announce, or they've got like a new piece of something they're offering, and you go, this is so tired.
Yeah.
You don't need to do this.
No,
you don't need to invent like a new piece of something, a little new morsel every single day to talk about on the broadcast rounds.
Yeah, Ava is slowly coming to the realisation that the left wing just aren't fun. This is something that has been said, God, even... I can't find the clip, but there was a woman on the He Will Not Divide Us camera who basically had to go up to the camera and say, look, these right-wingers, they're having fun. And it's very hard to actually push against them and not seem like a prude. And this is exactly what's happening here. How do you have a go at Farage? Like, you call him racist, and yeah, people just unironically say, who cares? Like, this is where we're up to now. You've overused your words that don't make sense. And you're just acting like... speech police, effectively, and people are finding that boring, and hence you have the rise of Andrew Tate, and it's a problem they don't know how to deal with, because all of their opinions and axioms rely effectively on this 21st century progressive liberalism, which they don't want to get rid of because, frankly, their entire careers depend on it. Their entire career at Politics Joe is keep putting forward the propaganda for this fifth wave liberalism. And they're kind of realising that it's not only is it not working because who they want in charge are in charge now, but it's also frightfully boring and pushing people to funner areas of politics and of real life. And they have no answers for it. All they can say is, why don't, just go on these podcasts, without really realising that the comms team, one, they are terrible, obviously, but two, they probably do realise that you put Angela Rayner in any normal situation, and while she may seem normal, she then has to answer policy questions and she will just die on camera.
You need to have some personality
100%.
and you need to spend most of your time actually trying to enact the policy, then bring it.
Who are the cool Labour people?
Oh my God, this is going to be good. Angela Rayner's obviously going to be the only one. Literally, who else is there? I don't even like Angela Rayner, but people seem to think that she's cool and like her. I don't really get it.
Last week I was out with a lord, but a Labour grandee, and we were talking about this exact thing.
Mandelson?
No.
See what I mean about them being Labour activists? I was just on a night out with a Labour lord, and we were talking about Labour policy. Yeah, because you're activists.
But we were trying to work out who is good online.
Right.
And I was saying, obviously, Angela.
Yeah.
I think she's very good online.
Boom, the most predictable thing in the world. Go on, name someone else.
I do think Darren Jones is good online as well.
Okay, gonna take your word for that. I have no idea who that is, so he can't be that good.
Keir Starmer comes across like Sadiq Khan. If they're in a 1 hour interview where they're relaxed, they come across very well.
100%.
Sadiq Khan, I can see why you would say that. I don't know why you're saying that about Keir Starmer. He does not come across as normal, ever.
When they're having to do short, sharp questions, they fall flat.
No, they do. They do.
Well, I think it's actually kind of the opposite. I've always found that Keir Starmer's better with the short questions where he doesn't have to do much talking. Sadiq Khan, obviously, I don't like, but he is good with the media just in general. So, yeah, I don't see how this analysis is accurate personally, but, well, fair enough.
I actually think Clive Lewis is quite good.
Clive Lewis is good. He is good.
Not really in the tent, though, I suppose. But if you got someone like...
He's not quite in the tent, but he's very good friends with Rayner. Do you know that?
Really?
Yeah, very good
know
friends.
Thank you for giving away you're a Labour activist even more, but no, don't put Clive Lewis front and centre. You will turn every young man off Labour, I can guarantee. Clive Lewis is an idiot who doesn't shut up about the leftist omni issues such as climate change. He goes on about slavery reparations as well. Just all these things that have become really uncool to talk about. He's personable, don't get me wrong, but my God. I have covered many videos of him before, and he is literally just a moron. So, no, I'd keep him out of the limelight, personally.
Look at someone like Bridget Phillipson. So there's someone, she does these fireside chats with teachers and education staff. Like, I think she does it once a month, but don't quote me on that. And she is not building up rapport with the education cohort of this country.
Well, yeah, it's because no one knows that happened. I certainly haven't heard of this before. I just searched for it. I just searched up on Google, Bridget Phillipson fireside chat. There's absolutely nothing that's come up. Just as speeches at Labour conferences and things like that. I don't see anything about outreach. So either this doesn't happen, but I don't know why you'd lie about this. So how is it so badly advertised?
Because every time she comes back on, she's like, and we've announced this and we've announced that. And then the second that she gets faced with like a slightly difficult question, like, okay, this 2.8% pay rise that you've announced, the schools can't afford that. What budget is it coming out of? And she'll be like, we can't make any promises at the moment. But
yeah, I know. I don't see why you think that would be any better on alternative media. Do you not think that people on alternative media pay attention to politics and wouldn't ask questions like that? For all the grief I give Rory Stewart, he actually did really well in trying to grill Rachel Reeves when they interviewed her on the rest is politics. But if they ever go on Novara Media or any alternative type of podcast or something like that, they're going to get questions like that. Oh, so you're going to give people, these teachers, their money? Oh, that sounds good. Where's the money coming from? You know, they can try and say taxes, and it might do well for a certain amount of people, but then these types of things are going to, as the way it works online, it's going to then spread out to all these other people talking about that interview, and they'll say, oh, she just said tax and she didn't push back on it. I mean, I know whoever was interviewing might not be very good at it in terms of politics or whatever, but now we all need to collectively ask, okay, can you go into more detail on that? And that's generally how it works. That's why you have to think on your feet, because you do something on one podcast, 10 other podcasts will probably talk about it. As happened here, they've referenced so many other podcasts here because that is the nature of it. In legacy media, they tended not to reference other channels or things like that. They'd just have a set of questions put together by some intern, and that's what they'd ask. Whereas when it's free and easy like this, you'll be like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, that question wasn't answered very well, or that question was answered very well. And you don't know what's coming next, and it's why effectively having normal people really works, which is what Reform have. But as they've gone through, you know, who's good? Oh, I guess Angela Rayner. Oh, Clive Lewis, but they don't want him out in front because he keeps coming up with all these ridiculous opinions. So it just leaves Labour activists in this really bad place and giving this really bad analysis where effectively all they've spent 20 minutes here doing is saying, please come on our show, we want to interview you. And they'll obviously do it softball. It's going to be so bad if it happens.
You're doing a fireside chat.
Yeah, you need to be more.
With teachers, you need to be human.
Yeah,
personable.
Because also, well, that's your main demographic that you have to please.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if he means people or teachers there, but yes. The demographic of people are the people you have to impress, yes. Still, that's the end of the clip, and from all I can gather, they don't really know what to do. I mean, even this comm strategy from these Labour activists who understand the alternative media a bit better, because they are still reliant on the mainstream ecosystem, they're still giving them the time of day, whereas, no, the alternative media really aren't bothered anymore by it. They really aren't. The ambition for a lot of alternative media now is to basically keep denigrating the legacy media because they just find it useless. Yet, because Politics Joe and their workers' career path is to get into the mainstream media, they can't denigrate it like they should. So it's very funny to see these aspiring new elites doing their best to balance the fact that they are alternative media but very reliant on legacy media, and then having absolutely no answer for Farage. There was no good analysis there and no answer to Farage, which is just great. So yeah, look forward to an exciting next few years. But for now, that's everything I had for you today. So last Laughing at the Guardian of the year is going to be next Saturday. As it comes to other streams, only going to get back into the regular schedule next year. For now, there might be something in the Christmas New Year period. Don't know yet. You'll have to wait and find out. Videos out as and when I can make them. I've done really well this week. This is actually the 5th video I've made in 2 days, so you've got a video every weekday this week, so I'm really proud of myself for that. And obviously I hope you enjoyed them, and if you did enjoy them, obviously like, comment, all that good stuff, but also subscribe, become a channel member, send super chats, super thanks. They are really good ways and direct ways to help the channel keep going. But with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.